Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? I know we're at the end. I know the energy is a little bit low, but I want us to end on a high and have fun. And this is going to be, like I said, save the best for last. Probably the best discussion, right? So let's do this. I want everyone to turn to your left. If there's no one on your left, turn to your right and give a big high five and say you're awesome. In 3. 1, 2, 3. You're awesome. All right, feeling a little bit better? I want to do that one more time. On 3, we're all going to say you're awesome, okay? 1, 2, 3. You're awesome. All right, okay. A very good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving me a little bit of feedback there. I think it's always important to get the energy up for a topic that's very close to my heart. This is not only a diversity issue, and I think we need to really talk about this not only for women as that other person in the room, but really this is for all business leaders. You probably, are working with a woman, you have a co-founder that's a woman, and you deal with clients as a woman. It's part of the grain, right? You have your mother, your sister, so this is something that is all-encompassing in terms of where we stand. And unfortunately, today we are not winning enough. Women, just starting with framing the current ecosystem we're in right now, in business, only 30% are run by women. These are SMEs. Fortune 500 companies, only 5% are run by women. And since we talked a lot about venture funding, we talked a lot about where is the next hottest startup, only 3% last year of all VC funding amounting to 1.46 billion was allocated to women-backed startups. And in venture firms, only 7% of the top 100 venture firms are led by women. How about government? 22.8%. That's only up a little bit from 1995 at 11.8%. So ladies and gentlemen, it is a little bit of a grim environment, but I'm really glad to be joined by some high-powered women who have shown us that all is not lost, and we can make the waves if we work together in getting women into leadership. So let's frame it this way. We're going to start with the macro view. We'll talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. We'll talk a little bit about your corporate experience. And I want all of you to also start thinking about questions which relate to your work environment and how women are a part of that. And not just women, but the diversity question, because we know this is not just an isolated issue, but a business agenda and a very valid one. So ladies and gentlemen, Tracey Fellows, CEO of Rear Group from Australia, Dato Peng, COO of MDEC from Malaysia, Grace Tia, Senior Director, Corporate Strategy and Development, Tencent China, Shannon, co-founder of Orami, Aliza, Knox, COO of Unlocked from Australia. We have perspectives from Australia, Malaysia, China, Thailand, and really, this is the World Digital Experience. So to start it off, I'd like to point to Shannon here. We had a little bit of a conversation about her own experience being a woman founder. Orami, which she'll speak a little bit more about, is an e-commerce platform. What has your experience been, and do these numbers speak to you very much?
Start with that one, right? Okay, so obviously I'm Thai. Maybe on a big picture as well. In Thailand, we tout the the highest number of women in management in the world. So that's good, right? But on the other hand, what's actually happening in Thailand is a lot of the women leaders are, in Thailand there's a lot of family businesses, right? So what does the family do? Okay, son, you get to be CEO, and then daughter, you're the one that takes care of the money, right? So you get to be CFO. Or you need to make sure that you're protecting us in the board, but all of them are there. And what we're actually seeing is that even though they are there, it's still pretty much, they're not listened to, or they're not respected the way they are. I mean, and this is really the truth, and I've done a lot of community work in Thailand, and even though the numbers are there, there's a little bit of mindset change that needs to happen. So in my experience of being a founder, a woman founder, I mean, it was tough in the beginning, because when I started in tech, it just wasn't, there weren't just too many women. I mean, I remember when we started to do women panels, and everybody's like, why are you trying to isolate the issue? Why are you trying to make it an issue? It's not an issue. The thing is, in practicality, it's not just a quota thing. There are real business reasons for why you should have a diversified portfolio or management or team or whatnot, because it's always great to have many different opinions. Unfortunately, in my experience, I haven't seen that too much in practice, and I'd like to change it even more. And even for me, I work with a team of all men in management. We don't have a single woman on board, including myself, and we don't have women, and I run a women e-commerce. So that's just kind of, a little bit there. And
All right. Thanks for sharing. And Tracey, what has your experience been? I mean, you've been in Microsoft and you were managing director and you were leading up the Asia Pacific operations. What were your observations in tech specifically, given our wild digital theme of going digital here?
So I think in Microsoft it was easier to get women because you had less engineering resources in the countries, right? And so in fact there was a very deliberate intention. You had a mix of kind of a soft target to say there's an encouragement to improve the mix of diversity without it being a number. But I remember my last job, I was the only female on a team of 15. And it had been a long time since I'd been the only female on a team. It's going back a while now, so I've been out of Microsoft 4 years, so 4.5 years. But I remember that feeling when the first time in the meeting, I found myself not speaking up because I couldn't be bothered, because they keep interrupting each other and they talk over each other. And I did find myself withdraw. And it was the first time I realized there is something to that, famous stat that if there's 2 women in a group, it makes a difference. Because I found myself, at least, not leaning in, but leaning back. Now, fast forward, I run REA Group. I'm very fortunate to be able to kind of, with the support of my board, make some of my own decisions. So we do have, we call it a commitment, but it's kind of a target or a goal to increase the diversity mix across all layers. Right now, we're just under 45% of our total employee base is female. Of our senior leaders, it's 40% is female. Of my ELT, it's 40, and on our board, it's 40. Now, we have a goal to get to 50-50, and the reason we think it matters is we're a property portal, so the people who look for property are men and are women, and it's young people, it's old people, it's LGBTI, and it's every mix, and so we need to reflect the market we serve, and we serve all consumers, and so that's why we think it matters.
And Tracey, you brought up a very interesting point, actually, in terms of the target. I wanted to turn over this side to ask Dato Peng, who served, in MDEC and in a very senior position for years now. In terms of this quota target, do you think a quota works against this? Is it necessary to have this quota, especially for our entrepreneurs who are thinking about their boards, structuring their management? Should there be a figure that we look to?
Thank you. We're talking about numbers here. Maybe I should share about MDEC first. MDEC is at the reverse. We're talking about diversity. The top 3 positions are held by women. And in my career, this is the first time I actually worked for the woman boss. And I think she just won the prize from World Digital yesterday as a woman boss. I hope one day it's not about just women boss, but actually the boss of the year, and it's a woman. That would be great. Talking about quota, I would prefer to say target is better. Depending on the industry that you are in, there are certain industry where you don't have big issues about having the right percentage of women, men, or what kind of diversity that you want. But there are certain traditional business we still have that issue. So if you ask me, do we have a problem? Some, and a quota or target would be good to be set. At the very least, you create awareness amongst the people, amongst the decision makers that is an issue that we should pay some attention. And who knows, maybe one day it's not about gender diversity anymore, it's about some other things, even age diversity, even preference of all kind of thing. It is going to be something that we all have to be looking at. And I'm also like to say that in the digital world, I think when it's not about your body strength, but it's about your brain power, we have less issue about gender diversity issue, and we are in a very unfortunate time. And I do hope that the Boys Club especially, you know, in some of the traditional business, they can open up their mind a little bit. Why I say that? Because last night I was at an event, I was talking to somebody, and the question was, I'm looking for someone. That's because the government has actually make it a point that we must have a bit more women, and I'm looking for someone to join the board. And okay, that means if you don't set a target, this conversation may not happen. But I am looking forward to the day that it's not about somebody set a target, somebody set a quota, that we need to make this happen, but it's more about I am looking for someone who can add value to my company regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of any background that you're from. That will be the day where I'm looking forward to.
All right, thank you, Dato. And Aliza, what has been your experience? I mean, we talked about quota, some of these different initiatives. I know you worked a lot with women in Google and in Twitter as well. What do you think has worked, and what are the positive opportunities that I guess organizations can look to? What are the best practices that you've seen?
Sure. So I think I told you earlier, in terms of women on boards, which is something where I spend a bunch of time on corporate boards as well as private company boards, but on corporate in particular, what really works, I think, is the threat of a quota, which is kind of tricky. So you have to somehow, the government has to sort of promulgate the idea that they might put in a quota, but then they don't have to do it. Because everybody says they don't want to be the token woman or the token whatever it is. But it's important, I think, even if you are there for a quota reason, in addition to your other skills, you go and you show that women can do it or that young people can do it or whatever, and then the need for quota becomes less. Within organizations, I've seen lots of things. I mean, both Google and Twitter have very active, women at organizations. Interestingly, I just had lunch with a woman who runs Spotify for Asia. Spotify, after declaring equal paternity and maternity leaves globally, they have said they're not doing any more gender affinity programs. They feel they're completely equal, and they're not considering gender as an issue anymore. So that's an interesting perspective. And given that they have Scandinavian roots, I think, it might be true that in that company, it's not an issue. Sorry. I guess what in the programs I've seen try to support women in terms of things they might need either in terms of seeing other role models or development in areas where women may, in some cases, be less strong, like confidence. I showed you that cartoon, if I can get it right, that I posted today on Twitter if you want to look at the actual thing, where the guy says, what I don't have in capability, I make up in confidence. And the woman says, oh, good, we equal each other out then, right? With the insinuation being that the women don't have in confidence, they make up in capability. So obviously, it's more of a joke, but one of the issues that you sometimes see in organizations that, if you read all the statistics, women don't put themselves up for promotions as much, women don't ask for raises as much. And so there are some things you can do in organizations to encourage women to do that. So I do, there are lots of programs I've seen that work where women get together and, they network a bit. But the thing I love about here, I was wondering how many people would stay, and the mix of people. To have these conversations, the single most important thing, I think, is to have men in the room. So I'm really, really happy about what I'm seeing here. It's more, a few of us had men who work with us, and we knew they were going to show up. But I think it's a bigger pool than that. So I feel, maybe the startup community is really in a better space than some of the traditional companies, because this is a really good crowd here, and it makes this conversation much more meaningful.
Thanks, Aliza. This is a very good point. And you talked a little bit about how this may not be an issue anymore. And I think, Grace, you spoke a little bit about that. And it's funny that you're saying that, because in China, I don't know if you guys remember, there was this SK2 ad, which was done quite well, by the way. There's this concept of 生理, which is basically the leftover woman. So if you're 27, 28, and you're, God forbid, not married, you're like expired goods, you're no longer wanted. It doesn't matter if you have a career. And that stereotype obviously works against us in terms of the ambition for the woman and what's important to her, and how, I guess, even in Lean in China, one of my counterparts released a report which spoke about how it's not only the workplace, but the home that is the battlefront, very much in line with Indra Nuyi's story in Pepsi, right? She's the CEO of Pepsi, and her mom still scolds her because she forgot the milk, right? So what are your views on that, and how has China changed? Is the environment very different now?
Well, I'm very proud to be a 剩女 myself. First of all, you know, in China, we have this old saying that woman holds half of the sky. So historically, I would say that in the workplace, women are pretty well respected. You know, based on my observation in the big corporations or small companies, a lot of women hold management positions. There are a lot of very smart, driven, you know, female entrepreneurs in China that I met them on a daily basis. So I would say in the workplace, there's not a big issue, but outside of the work, you know, like you just mentioned, there's still a lot of pressures from their families and their communities. You know, the perception is women should get married at a certain age, and then they should raise the kids, and then they should quit a job. You know, so that's kind of pressures. I think it takes a whole society to work together to solve that. I think fundamentally, you know, the parents should play a very important role. You know, how can you educate your daughter when she was 3? Tell her that you are just, you know, as unique as you are. You're just as, you know, you're just equal as your brothers, you know, or any other males in the world. So I think educate girls from at younger age, and then you know, give them equal opportunity to get education, make them feel very special and confident in the workplace is very important.
Thank you. And Shannon, I wanted to come back to you as well in terms of being a woman founder, right? And funding. I think you shared your experience about how you were completely pregnant and sort of going into the VC's rooms, and questions were directed not to you as the founder, but actually to your counterpart.
Yeah, so I'm quite loud, right? But I had 2 other male co-founders at that time. And on the year that I started my startup, which was 4 years ago, I got knocked up as well. Unplanned pregnancy, still with a boyfriend, husband. But basically, I was pitching, and I was talking to VCs, and I was pregnant. And every VC I would talk to, I mean, there were no women VCs at that time at all. And everybody who I talked to never asked me the question, but they basically looked at me and looked at my stomach and looked at me and my stomach. And basically, I know what they're thinking, and they're like, how are you going to have a kid and run a company and everything as well? These are the people that thought that I was running the company. Whereas some VCs that I would talk to, or management meetings, or any other kind of meeting, if I have a male colleague there as well, they immediately, maybe it's the way I dress, I don't know, but they immediately like start talking to him and directing the conversation to him. And you know, in the beginning, I got really, you know, defensive and stuff, and I'm like, but nowadays it's, I'm okay. Jaded with the whole entire thing already. But yeah, I mean, there still is that, especially in the VC world. I mean, I used to be a banker, right? So I wanted to be in the boys club. I wanted to act like a boy, and then Sex and the City came out, and it's like, okay, I could do a different thing. But, you know, it's still there. You know, I don't want to keep on being the naysayer, but it's still there. You know, we could do things to help it. Yeah.
I just want to add something. So there's a group of women in Silicon Valley who've left places like Twitter, Google, Facebook, or who are still there, who've created an angel fund specifically for women founders, as in response to some of the stuff you're seeing, that it seems to be harder for women to get funding, although I think you mentioned before this, and maybe you have the statistics, I've read somewhere that a couple venture firms have tracked, and actually the investments they've made in female-driven companies have returned on average better than those that they've made in male-led companies. So, but again, it shouldn't, you know, I think it's a great step that these women, like, so one of them is Jessica Varelli in corporate development at Twitter, and April Wood, who's a product development lead at Slack. So it's a great thing to do, to band together to help other women, but it shouldn't be that has to happen.
I mean, just to add on that one, the IMF has come out with studies, Catalyst Research Company has come out with studies. It has been proven that even the Fortune 500 companies that have more women on board are doing better financially, the ROI, the return on capital, return on equity, like there are stats there. And it's actually just common sense. It's like, you know, if you have more ideas in the room, you listed everything, and you're targeting like Fortune 500, you're probably targeting both men and women, right? So when you have all the opinions there, then you probably have the best tools to actually do your product and do your business. So.
Great. And now I think I wanted to zoom a little bit on the personal approach as well. Tracey, could you perhaps share, I think we talked a lot about the ecosystem, right, in terms of networks, how you need to build these things. You need to talk about the threat of the quota, the target. But what has personally helped you in your journey as a leader? Has mentoring been a part of that?
So I'm a crap networker, so that certainly hasn't been that. So I was very fortunate when I was first asked if I wanted to be the CEO of Microsoft Australia, and so actually I'll take a step back. I was hired at Microsoft Australia when I was 6 months pregnant, which clearly they knew, because there's a point at which that's not something you're hiding anymore. And then I was promoted on maternity leave. So I took 3 months off when I had my son, and in that time my boss at the time resigned, and so the person who was running Microsoft Australia promoted me on maternity leave. So I was fortunate to have an exceptional leader mentor who clearly, didn't overcame any of the stereotypes. Same person then went on to Seattle to take a bigger job with Microsoft and said, "Do you want to be considered for the CEO of Australia?" And I said, "No." And I gave him the 3 reasons why, which I won't bore you with, but there were 3 what I thought were very, very good reasons of things I couldn't do. And he said, "Well, I think you can do it. So you've got a weekend to think about it." And I think I was very fortunate, because if I'd had a different person in that situation, they could very easily have said, "Well, if you don't think you can do it, I'll find the list of 3 people who can." And, without being cliched about it, probably they would have all been men. So I was very fortunate. When someone has more confidence in you than you have in yourself, I think there's something quite confidence building about that. And so I did end up putting my hand up for the job, and I got it, and spent 4 years running Microsoft Australia, and sort of my career took off from that point.
And that brings up actually a very interesting point, not to sort of differentiate the men and the women, going back to that, but there are studies which show, I think HP did a little bit of a survey with their own colleagues, their own employees, and apparently women who are 90% qualified will think that they're not qualified for the job, whereas a man who is 65% qualified will say, I'm the man for the job, and that makes all the difference. I mean, even in negotiation, right, if you don't even ask, I think the statistic is women ask a lot less. I think it was, 7% of women only ask for a pay raise, whereas men, 57% of them actually do and actually counter the offer. It's all about making those questions and actually putting yourself out there. Grace, did you have any views in terms of how the character of the man and the woman is different, and how we can actually change that and really not feed into the stereotype?
Well, I think women should change their own mindset first, right? Be confident and, ask for what they deserve. Like you mentioned in those examples, I see that happening in China too. Just they have to deal with themselves, build up this confidence over time. Of course, people around them have to, support them, So yeah, I guess it's all from inside.
And Dato, one thing, have you also had a good experience in terms of man advocates? I think we have a lot of men in the room, and I'm really thankful for that. It's really very much about the society's role in every single issue, right? It is an important agenda, and we all play a part in that. What would be the role of the men in the organizations? What do advocates do? What is the best way forward for organizations to handle this?
In Malaysia, I've seen a lot of men supporting women in moving up, and they did it from their heart, so I think I would thank them for that. And personal experience, I have worked for a long, long time, and I can, all this while, my opportunities have always been given by my male boss. Like I say, I never worked for a female boss until recently. So it's always encouragement by the male boss that allow me to move up. But having said that, doesn't mean that it's always rosy, because working for such a long time, if you happen to have a chance to read our profile, or at least mine, I would like to say that while you have very good male bosses, but you don't necessarily have very good male colleagues. They will still like to look at you differently. We all once were PYT, so they will like to take advantage of you, and they would like to doubt your capability. So I think this has got to change. The good thing is that over the past 20, 30 years, I've seen a lot of changes, that men today, are no longer treating women the same, but we still have issues. I think the less developed area maybe, the men will still look at women with a different lens, and they will still doubt your capability. And I think at the same time, women also, like you say, if I'm not 110% certain, I won't do it. I mean, when I was offered my current position, I thought for a long time, I knew I could do it, but I'm not sure that maybe there's 1% of it that I may not know how to manage and handle. So do I actually want it? It's a man who actually encouraged me. And I agree with you that there are many men at the same position, and they would wanted the job even though I know I was better than them. So it's still happening. And we women has to have more confidence in ourselves. And I think seeing everyone on this stage, I think, yes, we can do it. Yeah.
All right. And with that, I actually wanted to open the floor for questions. I wanted this to be a little bit more interactive and getting the insights from all these top women on the board. Yes, women in front. Can we have the microphones out there, please? Or did we take all of them already? We took all of them? Okay.
Thank you. So I'm a female CEO. I'm also on several boards. I'm based in Singapore, and I wanted to touch on something that Aliza spoke about earlier, which was the pay gap. So in Singapore, 25% of women are in leadership positions, and they get paid 43% less than male equivalents. So obviously we can have quotas or targets, but particularly Singapore is a very bad example of equality. How do we overcome that as well? So not only the number of women in leadership, but how much they get paid.
I had to deal with this once. I had to go through industry standards, and that's the only way, right? I mean, if you don't have comparables, then you can't actually, because I didn't know I was being paid below standard. I mean, that's one way you do it.
Right. I mean, I think in a lot of large companies, you probably saw Google's been accused of not having pay parities, so I'm not sure who got the government to look into it, and now they'll have to reevaluate. I think salaries are particularly hard, right, because people aren't very public with them, and so, I suppose as an employee, some people are willing to talk. If you have good friends, you can try to figure out if you're a pay parity and then ask. I had a question just for audience interactivity. How many people in the room negotiated their pay in their first job, like their first job out of college or whatever? Okay, a few.
Including the men as well. Or even in your
Actually,
startup
so we
equity
got
or whatever.
2 women, that's pretty good. So usually when that happens, there's not so many, like only maybe 10 or 15% were brave enough to do that in their first job. And then usually there aren't any women. So, I mean, this one's really hard, right? Because I'm not sure how many people have the data. And then if you have the data, having the guts to say something about it. So, for that, I sort of feel like it's either women's groups like Board of Gender in Singapore or Financial Women's Association, and then the government who need to take some responsibility. But it's hard to make that happen.
I had a question before we go to the next one as well. We talked a little bit about the tech startup environment, right? It's all basically chaos. You're thinking about funding, you're thinking, oh my God, in the next 2 months we need to fundraise again, we need to sort out this, piece of crap that's happening over there, supply chain, this, that. When do we even think about diversity or even cases like what happened in Uber, right? Sexual harassment, what are the channels for that? Did any of you have any views on how the startup environment can be organized a little bit better? How do founders think about these things to build the sort of organization of the future? Because I think what we're seeing trend-wise, people are moving away from working in corporates and actually looking into the startup environment. It's it's a hotbed to be in right now, but is it the right environment for people to grow in? How do we feel safe? How do we feel that we're doing the right thing? Shannon, Tracey, do you have any thoughts on that?
So, while our company started 20 years ago, it'd be wrong to say I'm in a startup, but I think those things come from culture. And so I think in the end, what you want to build in companies, notwithstanding the quote the other one of the other gentlemen put about culture over strategy, but I think even in the startup environment with all of that chaos, and we have a level of chaos in our own more mature business still, it's around culture. And what are the things that are, and that links to values. And so if you're very clear on what are the values, even if you don't write them down, you haven't made them pretty, that you know what they are and you talk about them and they matter, because the minute you deviate from that, then people rightly will question, is it what you say or is it what you really feel and you believe? So I think it's culture, and as a leader, you set the tone.
I think just on the culture side, like that really comes from leadership. Like for example, we hired some transvestites. So our CEO is very open with it, you know, and they're like, you know, okay, saying accomplishments that they've done and all this other stuff, and so people know in the culture that you're not supposed to talk bad about them or make fun about them or anything like that. So that's one thing. So I work with the UN Women a lot, and they actually have a report that they have, which is, I forget what it's called, but it's like guidelines in the workplace. So one of the problems that we have at startups is, like you said, we're so busy doing everything, building culture, like who writes a handbook, really, right? And who actually does all these things with the workshops and trainings and all this other stuff? But as you get, as you progress in your second, third, fourth year or whatnot, 10 years, some structure needs to be put in place. So, for example, like in Bangkok, I had a girl reach out to me on LinkedIn. We don't know each other, basically. She was sexually harassed at a Christmas party last year for a really big company that you guys know. But basically, she didn't have any channels to go to, nothing internally. The HR fell on deaf ears. Then her friends kind of like basically said it's her fault, you know, and all this other stuff. And nobody did anything because there weren't any rules in place, and training wasn't done. And basically, it was quote unquote a boys' club. Not to keep harping on it, but it was a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like the Ubers. I'm not saying that's the firm, but it's like the Uber in the States, and that kind of thing happened. And so, you know, I had to escalate to the point where she actually filed a police report, and then they took action. So, you know, before we get there are things, and one of the things that the UN Women is doing is to work with bigger companies, such as Microsoft, Twitter, or anybody who has these guidelines, and share. And so because then we could just replicate it, duplicate it, do trainings and whatnot.
All right, thank you. And I have a second question. I saw a hand in the back earlier. Who is it? Any other questions? Yep, right there.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I write for TechWire Asia. I'm just curious as to how you as women respond when you have women founders who purport to be massive feminists, like Miki Agarwal and Sophia Amoruso, who purport these they put feminism at the center of their companies. But then it comes out that they don't pay women the same amount as they do the men, or they sexually harass their women workers. How do you, as women in tech, respond to these kind of things? Because I think they're startups, and they are trafficking. I think a lot of companies know that they can traffic on the term of progressive feminism, but don't necessarily adhere to those proper ideals.
You're pressed, right? Okay. A lot to that, no comment. But largely, like, I do whatever I can, you know. So for example, I'm still in a group regional position. In Thailand, we have a very good, diverse, you know, culture, actually. You know, it's smaller and whatnot, and we do what we can there. You know, like, I mean, I guess that's my answer. I do what I can when I can doing that. Outside of that, the board, I don't have control because I'm not on the board, you know, and we'll leave it at that.
But on the point you made, so I think women, I'm a big proponent of women supporting other women, but not if they're doing things that go against my values. So I want that the next generation of leaders from within my company, that there are great women, and whether they work in REA or they work somewhere else, I want to think that we're a place that attracts great women and we build great talent, and they can go on and do anything anywhere. That doesn't mean that women should support other women if you go against your values. There's no sort of free kick. Just because we're the same gender, there's no free kick. So for me, wrong. Like those, I couldn't support if it's the wrong thing. Doesn't matter if they're female.
Hi, thanks for your sharings. I'm just curious, given that you guys have noticed that how females and males might approach pay negotiation or like raising their hand in the workplace or speaking out, as leadership roles that you guys are in, do you have any techniques for kind of thinking about how you might reach out more to the females below you, or kind of some sort of, like how would you treat maybe some of the men differently to the females that you work with, if at all? Yeah.
So on the pay thing, I mean, just as a kind of hygiene, we do the checks, every paycheck by by job banding, by function, by gender, so that to try and stamp out any unconscious bias. But ignoring that part, I'd say there's a couple of things we do. One is we invest much more in mentoring for women, and that's very proactively, and that's because there's a lot that shows that women will talk to a mentor before they leave, and so there's some things we do around that. But there is different development, and I would say that would be true for anyone. I mean, we're all different, but there are certain attributes that are more common in women, and so when we think about development plans and when I think about career planning, very deliberately pushing women to talk about what they want to do. If they want to be the CEO, say it. Don't just think it, because if no one knows, not much is going to happen, and invest much more proactively in mentoring. Those would be the two that I'd say that certainly we do.
So I think one of the things that I've done in every organization and encourage people to do is to, with the exception of Spotify, to lead the women's affinity group, whatever it's called, Women at Google, Super Women at Twitter, so that especially as you go on in your career, younger women can see that there are role models. I think within that there are things you can do, exhibiting other role models. I often have speakers in, they can be photographers, they can be dancers, but just seeing other careers, really successful women, so they're role models. I think some sort of training around some of the things where people need help, and it doesn't have to be women. If there are men who feel they need confidence building too, I don't mean it to be all exclusive. And then, definitely, there are certain things you see, and you can read a million articles about it, but, and again, like I'm loud too, but women get interrupted more than men. You'll see it in board meetings, you'll see it in work meetings. And so one of the great things you can do, and you should do it for men who are getting interrupted too, is you say, didn't Dato just say that? Or, there are two things that happen. Women get interrupted, and so you can stop that. And women, sometimes it's not heard when the woman says it, even if it's really loud, like me. And then somebody else says it 3 minutes later. And you're like, but she just said that. So you're like, I think Sarah just said that. Or, that's really great. It's very similar to what Sarah said a minute ago. So I think just paying attention to some of these behavioral issues and helping with them. I also think for the companies I've been in, there's a very interesting phenomena, which is that I think because of the generations before us, and it differs by country. I think China's more advanced. Japan has still got a lot of struggles, but things have changed. So it's not very obvious. I believe that in Australia in the 60s, once you got engaged, if you worked at a bank, you were sent home. You're done, you're not working anymore, right? So the issues are far more nuanced. And I think a lot of women do not actually see any difference until maybe they're in their 30s. So I've led a lot of these groups, and we have even classes coming in at Google, at Twitter, wherever, and people say, hey, sure, I'm happy to belong to a group and see role models and talk to other women, that's very cool, but I don't need this anymore. And I hope that they don't. But I think in some organizations, you start to see things happen in your 30s where some of the stuff around men being competitive or, women who are loud being called assertive and being held back because of that when somebody else isn't. And I can give real life examples of those, not here. So starting to help people through that is also important. So I'm hoping that over time this stuff will just go away. But right now, there's still some of it here, and it's nuanced. And so the things you can do are bring women together to give them avenues to stop this or to help each other. And it really isn't limited to women. If you're a guy and you see a woman being interrupted, then you can do the same thing too. Hey, I think Tracey was still speaking.
And we have time for one last question. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Good afternoon. My name is Leon Hudson from 123 RF. I appreciate that the discussion or the panel is focused on leadership in tech, But what changes would you make much earlier in the process? What changes would you make perhaps in school?
Well, one thing that I care deeply about is keeping women in STEM, right? I mean, one of the issues with the balance in all these companies, the tech companies, is the programmer culture where, you know, we've got maybe 18%, I think it varies by country, but 18 to 23 or 25% of people coming out of school as engineers are women. So even if you're great at recruiting women and you get 26%, that still leaves women as a minority and a culture that might develop around it. So, and I think that's part of confidence, but you know, there is something that goes on, at least in American, Australian, and Singaporean, those are the three school systems I'm familiar with, education where women do drop out of science, you know, whatever is going on. So UN Women has these great programs, particularly in Singapore, maybe in Thailand too, to really focus on women in STEM. So that's one thing I believe firmly in, so that as, you know, you've heard all this stuff over the last 2 days, a lot of the startup world where things are exciting. I mean, there is e-commerce and things where sales and marketing allow people like me, although I do have a degree in applied math, to go forward. But a lot of this is scientific. I mean, we've got water filtration, water membranes, really cool stuff going on with AI, with robotics. You need some scientific background. If we get all the women dropping out before they finish school, we end up with this imbalance. So I think that's really important.
And actually, I wanted to draw upon that to then redirect a question to the panel. The female millennial workforce, the workforce of the future, what are the current needs? How can organizations continue to build a workplace that encourages the right talent pool that is diverse? Closing comments from the panel.
I'd like to respond to this one and also to address some of the questions raised. Since the topic is about women and leadership, it's not about women alone. So in an office environment, I believe that we should look at individuals' needs, and not just because they are women or they are men. I think that's really important. That's how we are doing it, at least in our organization. Giving them the right support. But of course, they have to deserve the support that we are giving to them. We don't believe in paying women less or paying the men less. We like to pay them based on what they are capable of doing, what they are capable of contributing, and we have been doing this from the day one, and we have never changed that. So I believe that any organization is able to do that if they want to. If they don't want to, or they are not doing it, it's because they don't want to, not because they are not able to do it. So in an environment that, if let's say we see some inequality, so it's okay to even enforce, you know, put some regulation in place, put some policy in place, until such time that what you are looking for can happen. And then that's when, you know, you move on to another topic. Today we keep talking about diversity or even inequality. That's because we all see that the inequality is still happening, even though we are improving. But we maybe can step up the pace and do something more than that. And for the past 25 years, I've seen a lot of changes, at least in Malaysia. We don't have problem with STEM because there's more girls graduating from engineering, computer science, and anything else than men. The only problem is that the men are not ready to accept it sometimes, that's it.
I think education is definitely very important. You know, as we discussed earlier, encourage those girls to study science and math, you know, in elementary school and high school, in college. So they will be like very capable to take on important roles in the tech company, you know, when they graduated. And also, I think female role model play a very important role. So if you have those female leaders in the corporation, and they can help to identify those, you know, the female employees who have the desire, you know, to be, you know, promoted or take on more responsibilities, those role models can actually reach out to, you know, communicate with them and tell them, you know, this is something you want to do, you should go for it, and look at me as how I achieved what I have been doing, what I've done so far. I mean, role models and education at earlier age is very important.
So I was going to say, one of the main things that we all can actually do, and what I talk about a lot, is it's the mindset change of the stereotype, right? So if you're, a dad or mom, the issue really is the mom or the woman is supposed to be the one that takes care of the kid. The mom is supposed to be one that does the cooking. The mom's supposed to be the one that is a little bit weaker, or men shouldn't be stay-at-home dad, or men needs to be this bro code or whatever. And so the moment that you set an example, this is what I think, and a lot of research on this too, the moment that you as a father or mother do something that doesn't actually make it a gender-related stereotype, the more equality that the world will be, right? Because then it's the same thing. Okay, girl grows up, you should be in arts. Guy grows up, you should be in science. So it goes back to the STEM thing. So the moment that they see that you treat women equally, men equally, men like to shop, boys like to shop, people aren't necessarily gay, they like, cosmetics, it doesn't mean they're gay, or anything like that. The moment we standardize everything and make sure that we don't bucket things into stereotypes, and you could do this at home because children just follow whatever their mom and dad does, right? They see how you treat your nannies, they see how you treat your people around you. I think that's what you could do now.
Tracey and Aliza.
I think that's a good way to end.
Any other comments, Tracey, Aliza? All right, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've wrapped up our panel discussion on transforming the norm, women in leadership and tech. We talked about the macro view of how the ecosystem really needs to support women in leadership, how this is not only an isolated issue, but remember that stereotypes, that this, it empowers men as well, because then men and women can continue to do what they're passionate about and lean into their ambitions. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone. It's a wrap with Wild Digital. Thank you, everyone.